AEW has existed for just under 4 years, and in their short history, various wrestlers have came and gone from the company. In some cases, we'll see wrestlers return to the company, but in other occasions, there are wrestlers who will never return to AEW, and sometimes there's reasons behind why. Today we're going to be talking about wrestlers who are banned from AEW. Subscribe to the channel right this second because I know the majority of you watching aren't already. And let's get into the video. In 2016, Brian Kendrick returned to the WWE when he competed in their Cruiserweight Classic. Before this, he had already had 2 stints with the WWE, as well as runs in Ring of Honor and TNA. Though he didn't win the tournament, he would win the Cruiserweight title that same year, and it seemed as though Brian Kendrick had caught a third wind in the WWE. However, this Cruiserweight title run was short-lived and didn't last long, and from here, he just became another lower card Cruiserweight guy. He would do this for a few years, but by 2020, his wrestling career had slowed down, and he had become a backstage producer and trainer in the WWE. It seemed as though his wrestling career was pretty much done. Until in 2022 when Brian Kendrick started getting involved in NXT and got into a feud with Haaland. No, not Erling, I'm talking about Parker Boudreaux. Brian Kendrick's in-ring return was announced and he was set to be facing Haaland on January 25th, 2022. However, the match never took place as it was reported that Brian Kendrick had asked for his release from the company, and 6 days later, the release was granted on February 1st, and now nobody knew what Kendrick was going to do next. Until a few hours later, when on the very same day he was released, he was announced to be facing Jon Moxley on AEW Dynamite on February 2nd, the very next day. It was a crazy turn of events and everything happened very fast, and what would happen next would happen even faster. On February 2nd, the date he was set to appear on AEW Dynamite, old statements from Brian Kendrick resurfaced, video and text interviews where he states his beliefs in numerous conspiracy theories began to spread over social media, with him stating his belief in the Holocaust death numbers being faked and exaggerated, the Sandy Hook shooting being faked, 9/11 being faked, and the killing of Osama bin Laden never happening. As a result of this, his AEW Dynamite appearance was cancelled, with Tony Khan stating on Twitter, "We've been made aware of abhorrent and offensive comments made in the past by Brian Kendrick. There's no room in AEW for the views expressed by Brian. We think it's best for all that Brian be pulled from tonight's card as we gather more info. We'll announce a replacement bout ASAP." Brian Kendrick would later post his own statement on Twitter saying the following, "I spread the most vile comments without thinking of the damage it would cause. I will live with this regret for the rest of my life. I am truly sorry for the pain I have caused," as well as, "I apologize for all the hurt and embarrassment I have caused with my words. These are not beliefs and were never beliefs of mine, and I crossed the line." All of this happened in the space of 24 hours. Brian Kendrick has not been involved in wrestling since, other than this past Survivor Series where he produced Ronda Rousey vs Shotzi, as he was specifically requested by Ronda. Christopher Guy began wrestling under the name of Ace Steel in October of 1991. A Chicago native born and bred, he would start wrestling across the Illinois and Chicago mainland scene. It was his time working the Chicago scene that he would become a trainer for the Chicago-based promotion St. Paul Championship Wrestling, and it was here where he would meet one of his students and soon to be one of his friends, CM Punk. Ace Steel and CM Punk would start a tag team together known as the Hate Breed. They teamed up together as the Hate Breed in the early days of NWA, TNA, and Ring of Honor, and eventually they were joined by Colt Cabana, and they would form the trio of the Second City Saints. Ah, what a great group of friends. They should start a podcast together. Throughout the 2000s, Ace Steel was a stalwart and a journeyman of the independent scene, having wrestled for promotions all over the world such as World League Wrestling, Pro Wrestling Noah, Ring of Honor, and even WWE. When WWE were in Chicago, he was often a guy that was called to be an extra, and in 2007, he was actually signed to a developmental contract, debuting in September 2007, but just 5 months later, in February 4th, 2008, he was released from that contract. He would return as a coach a decade later in the WWE, being signed in November of 2019. However, just 6 months later, he was furloughed as part of the cutbacks due to the COVID-19 pandemic. He would return in October of that year, but then a year and a bit later, he was released once again by the WWE in January of 2022. And a couple months later, during the post-show for AEW Revolution 2022, owner of the company Tony Khan announced that Ace Steel had signed to AEW and would be working backstage for the company. And obviously by this point, his good buddy CM Punk had been there for a couple of months now. He would make an on-screen appearance on AEW Dynamite alongside CM Punk on the August 31st, 2022 episode, in which he was cutting a promo encouraging and hyping up CM Punk for his match against Jon Moxley at All Out. And now it's time for all of you to hear about the All Out brawl for the 5,000th time. At AEW All Out 2022, CM Punk defeated Jon Moxley to win the AEW World Championship, and following the show, he would go to the post-event media scrum, where he made many comments and dissed the likes of Kenny Omega, Hangman Page, Colt Cabana, the Young Bucks, and more. And this would lead to a locker room confrontation with Kenny Omega and Matt Jackson and Nick Jackson confronting CM Punk and Ace Steel. And it was in this confrontation that a brawl went down. A brawl which saw Ace Steel supposedly bite Kenny Omega. Shortly after, all 5 involved in the incident were suspended, and Steel was released by AEW on October 18th, 2022. He is the only person involved in the incident to be fired as a result of it. And while it looks like CM Punk is coming back, there's a good chance that Ace Steel never will. Jimmy Havoc made his wrestling debut in 2004. He had trained at NW UK Hammerlock alongside other trainees like Zack Sabre Jr. and Fergal Devitt. You might have heard of them. Jimmy Havoc very quickly established himself as a deathmatch wrestler, and he quickly became one of the top deathmatch wrestlers in Europe, wrestling for promotions such as IPW UK, WXW, and he also competed in CZW's European Tournaments of Death in 2010 and 2012, and as well in 2012, he would debut for ICW and Progress Wrestling in the UK, two of the biggest promotions in the UK, and would spend the next few years as one of the top wrestlers in British wrestling, eventually appearing for the likes of Defiant Wrestling and making his way to America to appear for Impact Wrestling. Jimmy Havoc's career just kept on going up. In 2017, he started making appearances for the revived MLW, making appearances for them until 2019, and 2019 was perhaps the biggest year of his career, as he was announced and he appeared in the Casino Battle Royal, making it to the Final Four, and at that year's All Out pay-per-view, he scored a big win over Darby Allin and Joey Janela in the Cracker Barrel Brawl match. Following this though, Jimmy Havoc would mainly work on Dark, and only occasionally work on Dynamite. He was also getting into fights at restaurants against Excalibur and losing. On the 15th of April 2020, Jimmy Havoc and Kip Sabian would start teaming up and calling themselves the Superbad Squad. They had their biggest match when they challenged Omega and Page for the tag titles on the June 3rd Dynamite in a losing effort. And it was also that same month when Jimmy Havoc's career would change forever and also end. Jimmy Havoc was accused of rape, abusive behavior, and assault in June 2020 Speaking Out movement. Following this, AEW announced on social media that they would be sending Jimmy Havoc to attend counseling and rehabilitation, stating the following: "We wish Jimmy Havoc all the best as he receives treatment and counseling in an effort to overcome the mental health and substance abuse challenges in his life. We are aware of various reports related to Jimmy. We are evaluating his status with our company and will address it when he has successfully completed his rehabilitation." Jimmy Havoc was released from AEW in August of that year. He has not been involved in wrestling since, has never responded to any of the allegations, and if this image is anything to go by, he looks completely different.